therapist new, where research meets relationship. I'm Brooke, and today we're exploring something that sits at the very heart of psychotherapy, attachment, and relational healing: rupture, repair, and corrective relational experiences. Perhaps one of the most important and most misunderstood truths about the therapeutic relationship is this: secure attachment is not built through perfect attunement. It is built through repair after disconnection. Many of us carry an unconscious image of what a good therapeutic relationship is supposed to look like. We imagine therapy as consistently safe, emotionally smooth, deeply attuned, and free from conflict. The therapist understands everything. The client feels understood all the time. The relationship progresses in a steady upward direction, but clinically, that is almost never how meaningful therapy actually unfolds. Research on the therapeutic alliance consistently shows that the alliance is one of the strongest predictors of therapeutic outcome across all modalities, not just technique, not just interventions, but the relationship itself. But the alliance is not static, it fluctuates. Therapy is not a straight line of connection. It's a dynamic relational system, a continual to and fro between connection and disconnection, attunement and misattunement, safety and vulnerability. And surprisingly, those moments where the alliance strains or fractures may become some of the most transformative moments in treatment. And not because rupture is pleasant, but because surviving the rupture can fundamentally alter what a person believes relationships are capable of holding. In psychotherapy, a rupture refers to a strain, breakdown, or disruption in the therapeutic alliance. Sometimes ruptures are obvious. A client becomes angry or questions the therapist's understanding or challenges the direction of therapy or cancels a session abruptly or pulls away emotionally. But many ruptures are much more subtle than that. The client may suddenly say, "I'm fine," while emotionally disappearing from the room. They become overly agreeable. They minimize things. They change the subject. They stop bringing vulnerable material. Sessions start feeling flat, distant, or emotionally deadened. These are often withdrawal ruptures. Other ruptures can emerge as confrontation or protest behavior. So, expressions of frustration or disappointment or fear directed towards the therapist or the relationship itself. And underneath both forms of rupture is usually the same attachment question: will this relationship still hold if I am hurt or frustrated, misunderstood, disappointed, ashamed, or emotionally overwhelmed? For many clients, especially those with relational trauma or insecure attachment histories, conflict does not feel survivable. Misattunement does not feel temporary. It feels dangerous. Their nervous system may implicitly predict that, if I express this or if I need too much, I'll be rejected. Or if I'm frustrated, I will damage the relationship. Or if I'm vulnerable, this may not end well. This is what creates the negative cycle or the vulnerable cycle within therapy. The client's attachment system begins scanning for threat, and small moments of misattunement can activate enormous relational fear because the present interaction becomes linked with older internal working models, which are deeply embedded expectations about what relationships do under stress. And this is where rupture work becomes profoundly important, because the goal is not to avoid every rupture. The goal is to create a relationship capable of tolerating conflict, vulnerability, disappointment, and repair. An important and sometimes uncomfortable reality is that therapists do contribute to ruptures, not because therapists are bad therapists, but because they are human beings participating in an emotionally complex intersubjective relationship. Sometimes the rupture comes from empathic failure. The therapist misunderstands the emotional depth of the client's experience. They respond too quickly with problem solving. They miss the attachment meaning beneath the symptom, or they offer an interpretation before enough safety has been established. Sometimes ruptures emerge through timing errors. An insight may technically be accurate, but it's emotionally overwhelming or premature in that moment. Sometimes countertransference enters the room. The therapist becomes suddenly defensive or withdraws or becomes overly reassuring or overly intellectualized, or they become emotionally unavailable because something in that interaction has activated their own internal experience. And sometimes ruptures occur through cultural injuries or microaggressions, which are moments where a client feels unseen, invalidated, stereotyped, or misunderstood in ways that touch the identity or power or safety of their lived experience. And this can be through many different types of maybe marginalized groups. This can be, cultural groups, neurodivergent groups. These moments matter deeply because what often injures clients most is not the existence of misattunement itself. It's when the rupture is denied or minimized or defended against or just abandoned altogether. One of the most healing things a therapist can sometimes say is, I think I may have misunderstood you, or I can see how that landed painfully, or I don't think I fully grasped what was happening for you in that moment. I really want to understand your experience of what happened between us. Therapist accountability is not weakness or a loss of authority or failure. It becomes the beginning of the repair. One of the reasons repair is so powerful is because it creates what attachment researchers sometimes describe as a prediction error. The client's nervous system predicts one relational outcome based on prior experience. And this is typically something like rejection, defensiveness, punishment, withdrawal, shame, abandonment, or retaliation. But instead, something different happens. The therapist remains emotionally present. The therapist becomes curious instead of defensive. They become accountable instead of dismissive, and they become regulated instead of retaliatory. And in that moment, the client experiences something profoundly disorienting in the best possible way. The old relational blueprint no longer fully explains what is happening. This is part of what makes rupture repair a corrective emotional experience. The client discovers, I can express hurt and still remain connected. I can disagree without losing this relationship. Conflict does not automatically equal loss. My emotional reality matters. This is not merely intellectual insight. This is an embodied relational experience that begins reshaping attachment expectations in real time. Research suggests that many clients remember these moments of repair years after therapy ends, not necessarily because the therapist handled something perfectly, but because the relationship survived emotional strain without collapsing. And over time, repeated experiences of repair help rebuild trust. The capacity to believe that another person can be emotionally reliable, psychologically safe, and genuinely responsive. And that kind of trust cannot usually be taught through psychoeducation or coping skills alone. It has to be experienced relationally. One of the deepest goals of therapy is not perfect harmony. It is relational resilience, the ability for a relationship to tolerate tension, misunderstanding, conflict, disappointment, and complexity without disintegrating. This is especially important for clients whose earlier relationships could not survive emotional honesty. For many people, attachment was conditional. Connection depended on compliance, emotional suppression, hyper-independence, caretaking, or self-abandonment. So when rupture occurs in therapy, older fears often emerge immediately. I've ruined this. They will see the real me now. I'm too much. This relationship is over. I really should not have said anything. But when repair occurs, something new becomes possible. The client begins internalizing a different relational experience. Like relationships can bend without breaking. Conflict can be survived. I don't have to disappear in order to stay connected. This is part of what attachment theorists describe as earned secure attachment. Not attachment built through perfection, but attachment built through surviving the struggle. A good enough therapeutic relationship that repairs rupture may ultimately become more transformative than a relationship that feels superficially smooth but that never reaches genuine vulnerability. Because deep therapy eventually requires encountering the places where fear, shame, longing, frustration, dependency, and attachment collide. And healing often happens not when those emotions are avoided, but when they are held relationally. Over time, repeated cycles of rupture and repair begin creating lasting psychological change. This process is sometimes called transmuting internalization. The client gradually internalizes the therapist's consistent attempts at understanding, regulation, repair, and emotional responsiveness. At first, the therapist may help co-regulate overwhelming emotional states, but eventually something remarkable begins to happen. The client starts carrying that experience internally. They begin responding to themselves with more curiosity instead of immediate shame, more emotional flexibility instead of panic, and more self-compassion instead of collapse. And not because the therapist fixed them, but because the therapeutic relationship became an emotionally corrective environment where new relational experiences could be repeated often enough to become integrated. This is why rupture and repair work matters so much clinically, because these moments are not interruptions to therapy, they are therapy. The rupture reveals the client's internal working models in real time. The repair creates an opportunity for those models to evolve, and often the therapist's willingness to remain emotionally engaged during difficult moments becomes more healing than any individual intervention. As we close today's episode, perhaps one of the most important clinical implications is this. A therapy without rupture is not always evidence of safety. Sometimes it is evidence that the relationship has not yet become emotionally deep enough for vulnerability, disagreement, dependency, fear, or attachment needs to fully emerge. Ruptures are not signs that therapy is failing. In many cases, they are signs that something really important has entered the room. The question is not whether rupture will occur. The question is whether the relationship can survive it. And importantly, the responsibility for initiating repair rests primarily with the therapist. That requires emotional regulation, humility, metacommunication, clinical courage, and the willingness to tolerate our own imperfection without collapsing into defensiveness or shame. Because therapists will misattune sometimes. We will misunderstand and miss cues or respond imperfectly, get timing wrong, carry our own humanity into the room. But healing does not require flawless attunement. What often matters most is whether we are willing to recognize the rupture, remain emotionally present, and help repair what occurred between us. Because when clients experience a relationship that can survive conflict with honesty, accountability, and care, they don't simply gain insight. They begin developing a new template for connection itself. And that may be one of the most powerful forms of healing psychotherapy can offer. Thank you for joining me for this episode of If Your Therapist Knew, where research meets relationship.